Well, hello everyone. My name is James McLaughlin and I'm the editor of Car Design News, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the Alias Create VR webinar presented by Autodesk with us. I'm just going to run through some quick housekeeping before I hand you over. So just with technical issues, if you are struggling, just log out and log back in again. That's normally the best thing to do. It seems a very sort of standard IT solution. But bandwidth is obviously important. So if you've got live stream going anywhere, even if you are sort of tuned into the US election at the moment, I would shut that down. If you've got any other issues, there's a chat box you can reach us on. And flag things up. The other thing you can do there, and we'd love you to sort of put some questions to the speakers. There's a chat box where you can ask questions that will be put into the guys at the end. And if you need to recap on anything, there's going to be this broadcast will be recorded, and it will be available on the Car Design News website and our YouTube channel tomorrow. Anyway, that's that. I'm now going to hand you over to Colin Smith, who's a senior product manager at Create VR, and he's going to talk to you about the software. Thanks very much. Enjoy.
Hi, this is Colin Smith. As I said, I'm a senior product manager on the Alias Create VR team as part of Autodesk's automotive and conceptual design team based here in Toronto. I'm going to be walking you through some of the new features that we've released in Alias Create VR. I'm going to start with an introduction about what Alias Create VR is about, and then I'll get into some of the new things we've done in our latest release. First of all, we have to take care of some of the legal aspects. I'm going to be talking about things during this presentation, and I might make some future statements. In this case, the things that I'm going to be showing you here are based on our actual plans of record right now. Those plans could change, so no purchasing decisions should be made on some of the things we talk about today. But we'd be happy for you to check out Create VR, and I'll show you some ways at the end of this presentation that you can do that. So I'll talk about what Create VR is. If those of you on the line who are not familiar with Create VR, Create VR is an immersive conceptual design tool that empowers artists and designers to start their creative process directly in 3D. So this is basically a product that's been born out of the necessity of allowing 2D artists more flexibility in providing 3D geometry, ideation in 3D of their 2D images to the 3D modelers in the design studios. So traditionally we have people who do 2D drawings and they pass over those 2D drawings to 3D modelers, and there's a lot of iteration that happens between those two people. And the more information that a 2D artist can pass over to the 3D designers as far as volume and scale and how things should look and how transitions happen, the more that situation could be sped up, the iteration process could be sped up, and improves communication on both sides. And so this tool allows designers to quickly get into an immersive session in VR and start modeling their ideation of their products using their 2D representation or other physical files that they want to bring in. So this is a tool that's very specifically designed to be used in VR. It's not trying to be a desktop product that is now being brought into VR. It's specifically designed this way. So I'll be talking a lot about UX and the importance of the user experience that we've provided here, as well as the new tools. And we see this as a gateway from 2D to 3D and from concept art into the 3D pipeline or into the design studio pipeline. So a little bit of history. So we released the original first version, the first release of Create VR went with Autodesk Alias 2020.2. It ships with all of the current versions of Alias. So it ships with Alias Auto Studio, Surface, and Concept. The first release was based on NURBS surfaces and curves workflow. So you would build up your geometry on curves and then use those curves as reference or build off of those curves using NURBS surfaces. And because we're using the same geometry engine in Create VR as the geometry engine in Alias, all that geometry could be brought into Alias, and Alias would recognize it as a typical NURBS surface or curves, and it could be edited directly, or it could be templated and used as reference. And we provided this at no additional cost. So it wasn't anything that was an added cost for our Alias customers. It was a functionality that we provided for free. And it runs on the Oculus platform and Vive. Release 2, which was just released recently with the Alias 2021.2 release, we've introduced subdivision surface modeling. We've also, if you've been in any of the previous car design news webinars with Phil Botley, who's the product manager for Alias, you know that subdivision surface modeling was also recently added in the last year or so to Alias. So having subdivision surface modeling in Create VR allows us to have a data set geometry type that we can export now from Create VR into Alias, and Alias recognizes that the subdivision surface models as native models, and it can be edited in Alias. And as I mentioned before, there's a lot of focus that happens here on the UI that promotes what we call artistic flow. So the challenge with creating VR applications for design is that design can take up, especially if you look at some of the tools in the marketplace today on desktop, there's a lot of tools out there in order to create a model. And it's been the challenge to do that in VR is that you have a very limited number of controls at your disposal. So you have 2 controllers and you have a certain number of buttons. And we've tried to stay away from providing overly large number of toolboxes and dialog boxes and sliders boxes and all these different things that can pop up sometimes in order to change settings or change tools. We allow a lot of that to happen sort of organically as the designer is modeling. And we provided that, and I'll show you some examples of that. So we've been a lot of focus on how we can reduce the number of times that our user has to go to the actual panel, to the billboard where our tool set is. And there's a small picture here in the slide of what that looks like. And so I'll show you where we've done that. Obviously, we need to have a main tool set and you need to be able to access it, but we've done a lot of work to try and minimize the number of times that the user has to go there. So as I mentioned before, this is part of the Alias product line. And as a result, you can take data obviously back and forth between these 2 products. When you're in Alias, you can launch from Alias 2 ways. If you're in Alias Auto Studio, there's a splash screen that comes up in Auto Studio, and you can launch Create VR directly from that splash screen. If you're in Alias, though, there's a VR menu, and I'll show you this a little bit later in one of the videos, that allows you to open Create VR, but it also allows you to send data across to the session in Create VR. And when we do that as a mesh data. So regardless if you have a mesh file, if you have a NURBS model, or you have a subd model, those will all be converted over as mesh data. And the reason we do that is because Create VR doesn't recognize trimmed NURBS. So if you bring a trimmed NURB into Alias Create VR, it will untrim it, and that can be disastrous if you are familiar with the number of trimmed NURBS that tend to be in some of our data sets. So we bring it over, and the purpose of it is as reference. So we bring it as a mesh, and it can be used as a way of seeing the data or having some reference points and things to build around. So that could be Oscar packages, it can be constraint packages, it can be wheelbases. There's a number of different things you can imagine that you want to bring over. However, you can also use things through FBX. You can bring in a subd model through FBX. So I'll show you how later on here how we have a subd fascia that was done in Maya and that we brought over to Create VR. And the reason that's important is because we have a lot of customers in the automotive space who were using Maya subds as a way of creating models for conceptual design, and they may want to reuse some of those files, so they are completely reusable in Create VR as they are in Alias. Now we're moving from Alias or Create VR to the Alias product. You can bring in subd models and NURBS models through FBX into Alias, and Alias will recognize those as editable geometry. So we're not using any special file formats here. We're using proprietary or standard open source file formats like FBX, so that we're not creating special files. We want to be able to have open data communication between Alias Create VR and any other product that would be able to read an FBX file and understands NURBS or subds. So that's a little bit of the history. Let me show you what's new in Create VR. So first of all, we did a lot of work to redesign our billboard. So obviously with the addition of sub-D modeling, we've had to add some new icons. So we've added a new area within the billboard that is specifically around sub-D tools. So we have now a sub-D tool area, surfaces area, and the surfaces are our NURBS surfaces that was done as part of release 1, and obviously curves. So you can still work with all of these independently. You can have a combination of hybrid of NURBS and curves and surfaces and sub-D surfaces if you want in the same model. We've also created this new area on the billboard for what we call modular or modes within some of the tools. So we have our symmetry tools, radial symmetry, and our planar symmetry. And then under sub-D, we have the ability to move between box mode and interpolate corners. And then below that, we have some common tools like duplicate and delete. And then as part of that, we also reorganized the top layer, file menu, save, take pictures, find help, do settings, and exit the program. So it's a little bit of a different layer, different layout if you're familiar with the first release. So we've added these new tools, and sort of our design team has thought about how to best make this layout so it's not too cumbersome. You can find what you want really quickly and get on with doing your designs. We've also changed the way that you notice that the layer system does a stacking at the bottom. That's a new feature also to visualize the way that we're doing layer stacks. So I'm going to go through a number of the different ways that we've introduced sub-Ds. Now these are videos because it's just a little bit easier to show you a video than it is for me to be in VR and show broadcast in VR. But the importance of this is, we've not put every single subdivision surface modeling tool that exists in other packages. We've really streamlined the type of tools that we wanted to put in here in order to allow our creative professionals to be able to model what they want to model, but not over encumber them with a number of set of tools. And as I mentioned before, reduce the number of icons in our billboard. So what I'm going to show you here is a subdivision surface modeling using a volumetric, or what some people call box modeling or solid closed surface modeling. So using this tool here, you notice that what we've done is when you start, we've started with extruding this box or this sphere, and as the designer moves around the space, they get offered choices that are in contextual smart choices for how they want to do the modeling. So if you hover over an edge, it gives you an option to insert edge. If you hover over a vertex, it gives you an option to move the vertex. So this reduces the number of mouse clicks or controller clicks, if you will. We do things around increasing or decreasing the size of that sphere on the end of your controller so that you can have more or less control over the number of CVs or edges that you want to control. You also notice that when we were doing the extrusion on the side of this example, this mirror, is that there's options built into your thumb pads that allow you to switch between choices when you want to select a whole group of edges or one specific face. And again, all around the idea that we don't want to have to keep going back to bringing up other windows and pushing sliders, that we're trying to really economize the amount of UI that's involved here so that the designer can focus on design. It doesn't have to be pecking around in a bunch of windows constantly. So in this example, the designer is now selecting a number of CVs in order to get the shape that she wants. And then shortly after this, using these tools, she's going to do a paint selection in order to crease the front of this. So we're going into the crease area, and she's going to paint select the number of edges, and those all get creased. So again, we're using paint selection in a lot of our tools now that wasn't in the first version of the release. in order to make it easier for our customers to select multiple faces or multiple edges. And we'll see some of the more of that coming up in some of the other videos. So that's one way of doing it, is a volumetric approach where you're working with a closed surface and you're building up. And the other one that's very common is working on sub-D surfaces. So starting with a patch and then extruding it. In this case, we're showing a specific tool that we created, this disc tool. And the disc tool is obviously a tool that allows you to create this disc shape. Very helpful when you're working on wheelbases for vehicles, but obviously there's lots of other applications where you're going to want to have this kind of shape. And once the shape is placed, then you can see again, we're moving over to quickly make a new shape out of here, adjust the CVs, and then now here's another example where if you select an edge and you use your thumb pad, you can select the edge you're working on, or you can select the entire group of edges in that edge loop. So this designer is now making some changes to the number of CVs here to get them in alignment the way that she wants them. And then she's going to select that outer edge again. Oh, sorry, she's going to duplicate. So now we're going into the duplicate tool, duplicate that over, and you notice that she's working on the symmetry plane. So you see that plane in the background with the squares. That allows you to see that you're working on the symmetry plane. And now she's going to bridge between these two, and again, paint select the edges on one side, paint select the edges on the other, and then we get a bridge between the two. Then she's going to use the insert edge tool in order to insert some edges between the geometry. So in cases where we can, we allow the user to add on to some of the choices that they've made. So in the case of that disc tool, when you initially create it, you can use your thumb pad to increase or decrease the number of subdivisions on that surface, so you're not stuck with the same number or you have to keep adding them. We allow you to do that automatically or as you were actually placing the actual tool. And in every case where we've thought about this, we're trying to make it easier again for the designer to quickly make choices or make changes without having to worry about going back to some kind of selection. So again, there was another example where they selected the one edge and then was able to use a thumb pad to select the entire edge of the model. Now we're going to do a paint select here, do some creasing, but first you're going to quickly change the material so it gets something with a little bit more shine to it so you can see the creases a little bit better. Going back into the crease tool, going to paint select those edges, and then that's creased. And same thing on the other side. And there we go. So again, focus again is on allowing the user to quickly move between tools without having to worry about you getting back to the billboard constantly, and allowing the flow of creating your model to be the predominant activity that's happening. So one of the other things that we've been working on is, because we recognize that it's hard to put all the functionality that you want in sort of smart in-context tools, but we also want to reduce the number of times that we have to open the billboard, is we introduced this idea of a mini billboard. And so the mini billboard is sort of akin to what marking menus are in Alias, that this mini billboard will hover above your controller, your non-dominant hand. And on the outside edges of this billboard, you can see in this picture here, are some two standard controls that stay there all the time. So on the far right and far left, we have, at the far left, we have box mode conversion, and on the far right, we have a layer movement between, so you can move things between layers. In between, those three icons are contextual depending on what you're doing at any given time. So we've spent some time on thinking about the workflow and what customers would be doing, or designers would be doing at any given time. So those three in the center will change. And so this video is just a quick glimpse about how that tool works, so that we can build up the billboard, and then we take our other hand and we hover over top, and then we get a pointer, and we can select what we want to select here. So now we're moved into box mode on this car model, which allows the designer to see a little bit better about what the structure of the CVs are and the edges on this model, and can make changes to them. So again, bringing up the mini billboard. And now we're doing an extrude or a move tool. You notice that the way that this software is designed is that you can be comfortable standing when you're using Create VR, or you can be equally as comfortable sitting at your desk. You're not moving around in the space. You can move the objects around you, so you don't have to be moving around in a large open space. You can be sitting at your desk modeling in VR. So that's an example of the mini billboard. I'm going to talk a bit about bringing in subdivision surface models. So I mentioned before that using FBX, we can bring in sub-D models. So here's just a quick example of a triangular polygon model that's been created, and this is in Maya. Now there is some work that needs to be done to make sure that you get these out in quads, because Create VR wants to see a quad mesh. OBJ quad mesh works quite well, or sorry, FBX quad mesh works quite well. But you can see once it's been converted to quads and brought in, it recognizes it as a subdivision surface model right away, and it reacts just like it would if it was a native model. You can extrude them, you can, and then of course you can use the tools to add on to the geometry through extrusions or making new pieces and then doing a weld. So you notice there is an example of when the designer was working initially, it was on an extrude tool, but when the designer hovered over top of two common edge types, it realized that what they probably want to do in that case is weld those two together. And so the indicator on the controller changes and allows them to quickly operate a weld feature without having to go back and select weld as an operation, even though weld is a separate operation on the tool panel. So again, another example of where we're trying to make it easier for our customers to use the software, promote flow, and not have to worry about getting the user interface up all the time. So here's another example of importing geometry from Alias. So this is a file that a designer has made that's a constraint package. So understands the height requirements, where the wheels are going to be, and gives that the designer more information as they go in to start designing, so they're not designing just from scratch constantly. Also going to show in this video bringing in images that were drawings, planar drawings, as well as three-dimensional, not three-dimensional, but forced perspective drawings to use as reference while you're in the scene. So I start here in Alias. You go to the VR tab and you have a choice between geometry output all or selected items. So once they come into Create VR, now we're looking at that mesh geometry that I mentioned before that allows you to see the file, and now taking image planes and putting them down to use as reference. Of course, you put these on different layers and then you can turn them off when you need to. In this case, this is a NURBS workflow, so they're using the NURBS tools. But I thought it was a really good example of the type of things that you can use to bring in a constraint package and use as reference when you're modeling in VR. So you're not just stuck with bringing in images and trying to use those all the time. You can bring in all types of different geometry that you'd want to use as reference, and then it comes in as a mesh, and then you can model around it or use it as reference. And then, so obviously you can go back to Alias too. So this is an example of a design that was started in Create VR. So we've got some initial curves, and then the surface work was done in sub-Ds. and then bring that same subdivision surface model into Alias, where Alias recognizes it as a subdivision surface model. All the Subd tools in Alias will work on this model. It can be used as part of the design process, or it can be templated and used as reference, but that's up to the designer. But the important thing here is that the geometry that you create in Create VR is understood and can be reused and part of the design process in Alias. So going to be a number of the Alias tools that are and there we go. So that's what we've added to Create VR. So we've added a number of tools. Again, the big focus is on making sure that we promote flow. The subdivision surface tools, this is the first set of Subd tools that we've put out. We are going to be expanding our tool set a little bit, but again, the focus is to do that in such a manner that we don't overload the user interface or our designers, that allow them to do the work they need to do. If you are an Alias customer today, you can get Create VR. Create VR comes with Alias. So I encourage you to take a look if you haven't, to see what is available in Create VR. If you are not an Alias customer and you'd like to try Create VR, you can join the Create VR beta. And you do that by emailing createvr@autodesk.com. And you'd be added to the Autodesk feedback portal. So there's a beta portal that Autodesk has, and you join that portal after signing through a non-disclosure agreement, of course, and then you'd have access to builds that you could download and try. And for those ones, you don't need to have Alias installed. These betas run independently of Alias, so they're just time-bombed versions of the build that you can give it a try. And we'd be wonderful if you wanted to do that. You could give our team feedback. We're always interested in talking to not only beta customers, but obviously customers who are Alias customers, to find out what they like about the software and what they see as what could be improved. And we welcome you to join. And with that, I'm
Great.
Questions.
Wonderful. Thanks very much for that, Colin. You actually, my first question was going to be, how could we get hold of this the Create VR software? But we could probably move on to something. Well, here's a question from one of the audience. They're wondering where they could see some learning and training videos. Could you point them in a direction where you could see some of that?
Yeah, so we have some online on the Alias YouTube channel. If you're an Alias, actually, if you're not even an Alias customer, we have the full Alias tutorials are online. We are part of that, the Alias Create VR learning tools are part of that online tool, so you can read about them there. If you are part of the beta portal, there are learning tools that are part of the beta tools also. So depending on how you're coming at the software, it's available in a number of different ways.
Great. And it was a fascinating journey. You took us into this kind of these virtual worlds where you were shaping and forming things. But I wondered, that's the state of the art stuff now. What we could see in future releases of Create VR, Colin.
So, I mean, first and foremost, we're focusing on rounding out our subdivision surface modeling tools. There's a number of UI elements that we added with the Subd modeling tools I was talking about before, about the intelligent selections that come up between, if you hover over an edge, it gives you some of those choices, and some of the weld tools that come up if you hover over two edges. Those things are not all necessarily in the NURBS side of the package, so we're going to be transferring some of that, so we have UI and UX parity across the product. And then as we start to look forward, we're starting to look at other things. Obviously, there's importance around multi-user type interfaces, especially in these days of lockdowns and pandemics, that customers would like to be able to work multiple people on the same model, but not necessarily be in the same space. So we're looking at adding that type of functionality. So there's a lot to be done. This is only the second release. And we're excited to be able to add to this functionality and give our customers a really powerful tool to use as part of their design process.
Yeah, thank you. Few more questions are starting to come in from the audience. This one's a bit more technical. Do creases transfer in and out of Create VR using the FBX file format?
Yeah, so in the case of Alias, I believe we've checked it with Maya and with 3ds Max, that the creases will go into those products, no problem. The only place I've seen an issue so far is if you try to bring them into a product like Fusion 360 that uses T-splines. They don't travel as well there, so that might be the only part that might be an issue if you're trying to go to Fusion. It understands the model, but it doesn't respect the creases. But if you bring it into other packages that have sub-Ds as part of their offering, it should be fine.
Another one here about compatibility. Oh, hang on, they're coming in thick and fast. Just bear with me. Is Alias Create VR compatible with Oculus Quest 2?
It is the Quest 2. I'm not sure. We did so. The important thing about Create VR is it has to be tethered to a computer, so it won't work independently of being tethered. It does work with the Quest. I haven't tried it with the latest Quest, but I assume it should work based on what we know about that platform. Of course, one of the things we're trying to do is expand our hardware support. Obviously, there's new HTC units that have come out recently. There's new Oculus units, and then there's other hardware vendors in the space. Vario comes to mind that we'd like to adopt also, but it's just a matter of time and getting them on board.
And on the subject of hardware, actually, there's a question here, whether it works on Macs, Apple Macs.
No, it's a Windows-only application.
Okie dokie. Okay. Hello. Here's another one. Hello. Can you please remind me if I can access Create VR through my Alias window, or is it a separate app?
It is a separate executable. So when you are in Alias, when you launch from either the VR tab or from the splash screen, you are launching a separate process because it is it's a separate executable that runs in it. So when it doesn't, you don't have to have Alias running at the same time, but it does. So it does launch as a separate application.
Great stuff. Oh, here we go. Are there index controller models?
Not at this point, no. But that's something we'd gladly look into.
There's people have been intrigued by your presentation, Colin. There's lots of. Just give me a moment while I scroll through the questions. There's quite a few. Here we go. Is Alias VR compatible with alternative VR headsets, or should be only one provided by Autodesk?
Not sure I understand the question. The hardware that is supported right now is the Oculus hardware, and the HTC hardware. We don't supply any hardware.
Okay, no, that's yeah. I think that's what they were getting at. I didn't phrase it particularly well. Probably should have tidied that up. Here's another one relating to something I asked you. What's the future plan for this? Is Autodesk committed to supporting this standalone for an X number of years, or will it go the same way as Speedform?
We are planning on supporting it for X number of years. This is an add-on to Alias. It's part of the Alias product line, and as such, it will be part of Alias until I can't see any reason it won't be. But yes, I understand that there are some Speedform users out there who were using Speedform, and Speedform has been discontinued. I think a lot of the decision around that was the addition of Subdivision surface modeling built into Alias rather than having as a separate application, and so having a bit of redundancy in those packages. There was a lot of requests from customers, and again, I don't think Phil is on the line, but Phil Botley, who's the PM for Alias, would be best person to talk to about that. But from my understanding, there was a lot of our customers on Alias customers who wanted to have subdivision surface model integrated in as part of Alias instead of a separate application, and so that was the decision that was made around Speedform.
Okay. Could you draw a comparison between Create VR and Gravity Sketch?
Yeah, so I mean, Gravity Sketch is a similar product that's out in the market right now. They offer subdivision surface modeling as well as NURBS modeling. The only difference, main difference, is that they're not an Autodesk product; they're an external product. You know, I'm fairly familiar with Gravity Sketch. I know we have a number of customers and who are using it and like it. This is an offering that allows our customers to have access to this type of functionality without having to have a separate software package as part of their tool set. And so if they're Alias customers, they have an integrated way of getting data to and from and use Alias and Alias Create VR in their pipeline.
Right. Okay. Another technical question on sort of specifics. Do you have an align surfaces functions in Create VR similar to Alias?
Not at the same technical level as Alias. You can do alignments and the NURB side, and that's not implemented yet in the subdivision surface side, but that's something we'd like to do in a future release. But you know, when you get, I should probably stress, this is not technical surfacing inside of VR. It's a conceptual modeling tool that allow you to quickly create volume and be able to ideate your 2D drawings or 2D concepts into 3D. We're being very careful not to make this too technical to a point where there has to be a lot of user interface and a lot of interaction to do things. Now, having said that, where there are UI constructs that make sense and customers think that it would be useful, we're willing to look at those things. But again, we're being cautious about the number of tools that we put in all at once to overwhelm the user interface and interrupt the flow that our customers desire when they're designing things.
Okay. Okay, here we go. Will it work with the new HP Reverb G2 VR device?
Not at this time, but again, adoption of hardware is something that we want to do over time. It will be driven primarily by what our customers in the automotive spaces are asking us that they're adopting. And you know, hardware, there's a couple things around adopting hardware. One of them is, you know, it probably, in most cases, probably works. The challenging part is that we don't have the controllers visible inside of the VR space. And so if we don't have the controllers and the mapping, that becomes difficult. So that's just a matter of time, and that takes for our team to come up with the new controllers, put them in the system, make sure they're working correctly. So as we can, we are adding new hardware.
Good stuff. And is there a plan to integrate the Alias modeling abilities, e.g. NURBS, into Sugar Hill B? Is that? What was that? Yeah.
Okay, so just for reference, Sugar Hill is the old name of, so before there was Create VR, we were part of the Autodesk Sugar Hill project team. Since the last release, we've changed the name of the team. They're no longer Sugar Hill team, they're now the Create VR team. So for people who don't understand what Sugar Hill is, that's an old reference. Can you repeat the question again? What the question?
It's about to integrate modeling abilities, Alias modeling abilities.
Yeah, so I think similarly to one of the previous questions is obviously we have a lot of experience at Autodesk and in Alias and the ACD team in particular around modeling. And we would like to get the right set of tools from the Alias tool set into Create VR without being too heavy-handed on it. So yes, you know, after we've had things like customers have had a chance to use the software and talking to our beta customers, if they see particular tools inside of Alias that they think would be useful, we'd be happy to consider them. But again, we're being cautious about how rapidly we add functionality into this, that we don't want to add things for the sake of adding things.
Trying to avoid sort of being too complex. There's another question here about headsets, Colin. Forgive me if there's going to be an overlap with the question we had earlier, but I'll put it to you all the same. Will it be available as headset use only, independently from your PC, similarly to Gravity Sketch?
Sorry, one more time with the question.
Will it be available as headset use only?
Well, it may be eventually, but at this time it isn't.
Okay.
It has to be tethered at this point.
Okay, there's another one. Can we use this to visualize our complete Alias models as well? Does it support Alias HDR environment and shaders?
No, so the purpose of this is not as a design review tool. So we have functionality built into Alias for design review. We have Red for design review. This tool is not something that's intended to bring in an Alias model that has backgrounds and has all kinds of materials applied to it. That is something that's built. Some of that is built into Alias, and some of that is built into Red. And we see the path for visualization and design review is using Alias and Red together.
Do you happen to know what the offhand what the email for the beta sign up is? Someone's asking here if we could. Yeah,
it's create VR, all one word, at autodesk.com.
Great stuff. Okay, just give me a moment. I'm going to scroll up and down because there was a deluge and now it seems to have petered out somewhat, but I don't think we've missed anything. Lovely. No, I think that's it. So if there aren't any more questions, I'll leave you if you wanted to wrap up, Colin, or if that is if that's everything, we can leave it there.
Well, I think again, thank you for people taking the time to watch this webinar. Appreciate it. If you are interested in trying Create VR for yourself, if you're an Alias customer, you already have Create VR. So go in and try it out. Get a headset. Give it a try. We're curious about your feedback. We'd love to hear your feedback on it. If you are not an Alias customer and you want to try it, then you just simply email createvr@autodesk.com, and you can be added to the Autodesk feedback portal where you can get downloads of the beta version and give it a try.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Colin. I should just say as well that you guys are going to be, I'm not sure if it's you personally, but you are going to be at the Car Design Dialogues event as part of the schedule on the 3rd of December. So anyone sort of in the audience who's interested in hearing more, there'll be another session. I think the subject matter to be confirmed at this stage, but I'm sure it would be very, very interesting and useful to the audience and the readers. Car Design News. So thank you very much, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.